I never thought the day would come when a single scream echoing through my own kitchen would make 3 neighbors drop their gardening gloves, abandon their front porches, and sprint toward my house as if someone were fighting for their life. But that's what happened. And the person screaming, it wasn't me. It was my 76-year-old mother-in-law, Carol Reed, staring at my refrigerator as if she had just discovered a crime scene. Her face went white, then red, then white again. She jabbed a trembling finger at the shelves and shouted loud enough to rattle the window frames. "Thomas, get in here right now. What has this woman done?" My husband rushed in, pale as driftwood, while the neighbors pressed their faces to the screen door, unsure if they should call the police or a priest. The cause of that explosion, not blood, not broken glass, not a fire. No, it was a row of tidy labels in the fridge, each one reading, "Belongs to Clara." But what she didn't see, what none of them saw, was the real bomb about to drop the invoice glowing on my tablet. A full breakdown line by line of 20 years of unpaid labor-cooked meals, washed linens, planned gatherings, spotless Sundays, priced at Maine's professional rates. And I was about to read it out loud. If you've ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you they made your life comfortable while standing in a house you paid for, if you've ever swallowed humiliation so quietly that you almost forgot what your own voice sounded like, you're going to understand exactly why that scream didn't scare me. It freed me. Because my husband thought saying, "We're doing separate budgets from now on," would make me panic. Instead, it made me dangerous. And trust me, what happened that Sunday morning was only the opening act. There is a moment later in this story, one I have never told publicly, that changed everything, even more than that scream. Most people think they'll see it coming. They won't. Before we dive into the mess, the justice, the numbers, and the twist that shocked even me, hit subscribe so you don't lose this story halfway if life pulls you away. This channel is where we speak truths families whisper about, but never face directly. Now, are you ready to hear what truly set my mother-in-law off? And what happened after the neighbors walked in? Good, because once this story starts, you won't guess how it ends. When people look at a calm, quiet woman in her 50s, they often imagine softness, patience, endless giving. They rarely imagine the truth that inside her chest, there might be a storm she has spent decades holding back. For 20 years, that was me, Clara Hayes, a woman who kept a home running like a well-oiled lighthouse on the coast of Maine. A woman who made every Sunday dinner feel like a small holiday. A woman who believed that invisible work still counted, even if nobody else seemed to notice. When Thomas and I bought our house, the blue one, perched on the cliff with the wooden deck that always smelled like sea salt and pine, I thought it would be the beginning of the gentlest chapter of my life. I used the money from selling my mother's old home, the one she left me when she passed. 70% of the purchase came from that sale. 70%. My lawyer had insisted I keep clear records, and I did. But in Thomas's family, what I contributed never really mattered. In their eyes, I was the woman who made crafts on the internet, as they like to say. As if my small business, the little workshop, where I created hand-carved ornaments, embroidered cushions, and custom pieces people all over the state loved, was nothing but a hobby to keep me from bothering their precious Thomas. It was his mother, Carol, who said it most often, usually with her lips pressed tight, her eyes scanning my home, like she was evaluating a hotel room she didn't fully approve of. "Clara, dear," she would sigh, "I think it's sweet that you make things. It must help you pass the time. Pass the time. She said it as if I spent my days twirling in circles, waiting for her son to come home and hand me purpose. She never saw the hours I worked. She never saw the orders. I shipped the clients. I kept the emails. I answered late at night while everyone else slept. She certainly never saw the spreadsheets, the ones tracking expenses, deliveries, materials, taxes. She thought creativity was the opposite of real work. And Thomas? He said nothing. He never defended me. Not once. Every Sunday, Carol would arrive at our home precisely at 1 o'clock. She treated it like a royal obligation and expected the welcome of a queen. Clara, you didn't season the roast the way I showed you. Clara, the bread should be warmer when served. Clara, did you forget the special tea I like? Everything was a test. Every mistake, a small moral failure. Every success, an expectation for next week. And Thomas would sit there, cutting his food, nodding politely to his mother, as if this routine of criticism was just the natural rhythm of family life. Meanwhile, I was the one who scrubbed the pans, soaked the stains, arranged. The table ran to the store when Carol decided she wanted a different side dish. I was the one who kept the kitchen sparkling enough for her inspection. I was the one who made sure everything looked like the happy family they wanted others to believe they were. But in return, silence, invisibility. Funny how people can walk through a spotless home, eat a warm meal, enjoy fresh linens, and somehow imagine it all just appears. Like magic. Like the house itself cooks cleanse, manages plans, and pays the bills. They don't see the hands doing the work. They don't see the woman behind it. I still remember the first time I realized how deep the disrespect ran. It was a warm August afternoon, the kind where the breeze from the ocean carries just a hint of salt, and the horizon looks endless. I had spent 2 days preparing a seafood stew Carol once claimed to love. 2 days cleaning, chopping, simmering, tasting, adjusting. My back ached. My knees were stiff. But I was proud. Carol took 1 spoonful. 1. Then she set the bowl down and said in a voice sugar-coated, but sharpened like a knife, "It's a bit heavy, dear. You tried." Thomas didn't look at me. He just kept eating, pretending he didn't hear. That night, as I scrubbed the pot alone, listening to the water roar into the sink, I realized something painful. If I disappeared, nothing in that house would stop running. They would simply find someone else to take what I had built and pretend it had always been theirs. And still, I stayed quiet. I swallowed the disrespect. I convinced myself that patience was strength. But patience can turn into a cage, especially when the people around you mistake it for weakness. So when Thomas finally turned to me one quiet Friday evening after his mother left and said with that practiced calmness of his, "Clara, from next month on, we're doing separate budgets. I can't keep supporting you like this." Something inside me didn't break. It woke up. I looked around the kitchen, my kitchen, the one I designed, the one I paid for, the one I kept alive with my own hands. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt ready because he had no idea what those words had started. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean surrender, a silence that doesn't belong to fear or defeat or resignation. It's the silence a woman steps into when she decides she's done begging to be seen and is finally ready to see herself. That was the silence that wrapped around me after Thomas told me he was done supporting me. It didn't crush me. It clarified me. He went to bed early that night, muttering something about being tired from work. but I stayed at the kitchen table long after the house went still. I didn't cry. I didn't argue with myself. I didn't replay his words over and over like I used to. Instead, I opened my notebook, the one I normally used for designing new craft ideas, and I wrote a title across the top: Household Operations, Full Workload Breakdown. Just seeing the words felt like lighting a lantern in a dark room. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't listing chores. I was listing labor. Every invisible hour, every mental task, every responsibility someone had decided didn't count. I wrote slowly, deliberately. Meal planning, 3 hours per week. Prep and cooking, 10 hours. Dishes and cleaning, 8 hours laundry. 6 yard and garden. 4 household scheduling, 3 grocery trips. 2 family hosting, seasonal. 6 hours each event. Budget management, 3 hours. Seasonal maintenance and oversight, variable. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the page. There in simple ink was the truth of my life, the life they never cared to look at. Then I opened my laptop and searched professional domestic service rates. Maine. The numbers startled even me. Private chefs, housekeepers, gardeners, home managers, errand services. I typed the rates beside each task, like a quiet accountant evaluating an overdue bill. When I totaled the weekly estimate, I felt something inside my chest straighten, as if my spine had grown an inch taller. That was the moment I realized I hadn't been supported. I had been subsidizing a household without acknowledgement, without credit, and without choice. But I still didn't say anything to Thomas that night. He wasn't ready to hear the truth, and I wasn't ready to waste breath. The next morning, everything changed quietly. I woke early, as I always did. But instead of walking to the kitchen to cook breakfast, I made myself a single cup of tea and sat on the back deck, watching the ocean swell against the rocks. The cold air felt sharper, brighter, cleaner somehow. When Thomas came downstairs, he looked confused. "No breakfast?" he asked. I smiled softly. "You wanted separate budgets," I said. I thought it was time to adjust. His eyes flickered, uncertain, irritated. But before he could reply, I stood up, walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and began placing small, adhesive labels on the items I had bought with my money. Belongs to Clara. Purchased by Clara. Personal groceries. Do not use. The simple act of peeling those labels, pressing them onto yogurt containers, fruit boxes, bottles of tea, it felt almost ceremonial, like I was finally reclaiming something that should have been mine all along my space. Thomas watched, arms crossed. "What are you doing?" "Exactly what you asked for," I answered calmly. "Separate budgets, separate purchases, separate responsibilities." He scoffed, almost laughing. "Clara, don't be dramatic." I turned and looked at him, not angry, not hurt, just done. "If you think clarity is dramatic," I said, "then maybe you're not used to a world where everything is no longer done for you." His face tightened. That was the first crack in his confidence. A small one, but real. I spent the rest of the morning differently than usual. I didn't vacuum before he asked. I didn't run to the store when the coffee he liked was running low. I didn't rush to tidy the living room before he made a comment about keeping things presentable. I simply worked on my craft orders in my workshop, my little sunlit corner of the house that always smelled like cedar and linen thread. Around noon, I heard Thomas mutter under his breath, "It must be nice, having all this free time for your little projects." Normally, those words would have sent a sting through me, sharp enough to ruin my entire day. But this time, I wrote one sentence on my workload list: emotional strain, surcharge. Not out of spite, out of truth. By late afternoon, I was ready for the next step. I drove to the store and bought groceries, only for myself. The things I liked, the things I denied myself for years, because Carol preferred something else, or Thomas didn't like the smell, or someone complained about unnecessary spending. Blueberries, herbal tea, Greek yogurt, fresh salmon, a small box of dark chocolate. I placed them. I placed them into my cart with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. When I returned home, I restocked the fridge label by label, item by item, and with every label I pressed into place, I felt the same message echo in my mind. This is mine. This is my labor. This is my line in the sand. Thomas didn't know it yet, and neither did his mother. But Sunday was coming, and for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't cooking. Sunday mornings had a rhythm of their own in our house. For almost 2 decades, I had been the silent engine behind that rhythm, waking before sunrise, prepping ingredients, setting the table, seasoning whatever meal would satisfy Carol's unpredictable palate. The house always smelled like garlic and herbs by 8 o'clock. It was tradition, routine, expectation. But expectation dies quietly, long before anyone realizes it. That Sunday, I woke at my usual hour. But instead of tying my apron, I wrapped myself in a soft shawl and stepped onto the back deck with my cup of peppermint tea. The air was crisp. The waves were slow. Even the gulls seemed quieter than usual. It was peaceful, strangely peaceful. The kind of peace that fills the room just before a storm walks in. Inside the house, everything was still. No chopping board, no simmering pot, no clattering pans. It was the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. A quiet so complete, it made the ticking clock on the kitchen wall sound like a heartbeat. Around 8:30, I heard footsteps, slow, curious, confused. Thomas appeared at the sliding door, squinting against the morning light. "You're out here?" he asked. It was almost funny, as if I had committed a crime by not being over a hot stove. I smiled, gently sipping my tea. "Yes, it's a beautiful morning." His eyes drifted toward the silent kitchen. The absence of movement seemed to unsettle him more than any argument ever had. "Clara, are you not cooking today?" "No," I said simply. "Not today." He blinked, trying to fit that answer into the version of reality he'd always lived in. "But my mother is coming at 1. You know that." "I do," I replied. "And if you want a meal prepared for her, I can send you my service rates. Everything's outlined clearly." The look he gave me then, it wasn't anger yet. It was confusion, like a man standing in a house he's lived in for 20 years, but suddenly unable to find the doors. "You're seriously doing this," he muttered. "I'm honoring the rules you made," I said softly. "Separate budgets, separate responsibilities." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but nothing came out. Instead, he walked away, running a hand through his hair, the way he always did when he felt the ground shifting under him. I went back to my tea. At 9:30, his phone rang. I didn't need to hear the voice on the other end to know who it was. Carol called every Sunday morning to check on the progress of her lunch. Thomas answered quietly. "Hi, Mom. Yeah, we're fine. Yes, we're home. No, she hasn't started yet. I know, Mom. No, I don't know. Let me, Mom. Please. Mom, I'll take care of it." His voice grew tighter and tighter, the way a rope does when both ends are pulled. After he hung up, he walked back to me, frustration radiating off him. "She's expecting your usual meal, Clara. She's already talking about the baked cod you make." I nodded calmly. "And I hope she enjoys lunch. But it won't be from me." "You can't just decide that," I'm not deciding it, I said. You did. His mouth opened, then closed again. I left him standing there, staring at the ocean as if waiting for it to provide instructions. By 10:30, the tension in the house felt thick enough to touch. Thomas paced through the living room, picking things up and putting them down without purpose. He kept glancing at the kitchen, as if hoping the sight of cold counters might magically change into a feast if he blinked enough times. But nothing changed. At 11, he tried again. Clara, can't you just do it this once? Just today. We'll talk about everything after. Thomas, I said, gently. That's what I've done for 20 years, just this once. And every time I gave in, it erased the last boundary I tried to set. He swallowed hard, unable to look at me. At 11:30, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. Too early for Carol. Too early for anyone. Thomas froze. I stayed seated. Through the frosted glass, I saw a shadow, tall, elderly, slow-moving. When the door opened, it wasn't Carol. It was her husband, Malcolm Thomas's father. He rarely came alone. He rarely came early. And he never came unannounced. He looked around the quiet kitchen, then at Thomas's worried face, then at me, calm on the deck with my tea. Everything all right, he asked. Thomas stammered. Yes, Dad. Clara's just taking the morning off. Malcolm's eyes narrowed slightly. He understood more in one glance than Carol had understood in 20 years. He nodded politely to me. Good morning, Clara. Good morning, I replied. Then he turned to Thomas and spoke in a voice low enough for me to barely hear. Your mother is not going to like this. I smiled into my tea. He had no idea. What was coming next wasn't about liking. It was about learning. And Sunday had only just begun. By 12:45, the house felt like a held breath. Too quiet, too still, too wrong. At least to anyone who had grown used to the old rhythm of our Sundays. I sat on the deck, sipping another cup of tea, while Thomas paced inside. Every few minutes, he'd stop at the window to check if I was still, doing nothing. It unsettled him in a way he couldn't put into words. At 12:58, the sound arrived. Not the soft knock of a polite visitor. Not the familiar ring of the bell. No, it was the honk of Carol's car. Short, sharp, imperious, like a queen, announcing her arrival at the gates. Thomas froze mid-step. I didn't move. A moment later, the front door opened, without knocking, as always, and Carol stepped inside, wearing her usual Sunday armor, pearl earrings, stiff blazer lips, tightened into a line of expectation. Behind her came Malcolm, slower, quieter, watching everything, with the eyes of a man who already sensed a storm. Carol didn't greet anyone. She didn't ask how we were. She never did. Instead, she inhaled deeply. Nothing. No rosemary, no lemon, no sizzling butter, no Sunday feast. Her brows knit together. Confusion first, then suspicion. She turned sharply toward the kitchen heels, tapping like tiny hammers on the wooden floor. Clara. She called, her voice floating with forced sweetness. Are you in here? I hope you didn't forget the cod. Thomas said you were making something special. I remained seated. From where I sat, I could see everything clearly. Carol's expression hardening as she approached the kitchen doorway, her spine straightening with the confidence of someone who believes the world will always bend to her expectations. And then she stepped inside. Silence. A heavy, stunned silence. No pots on the stove, no cutting board, no steam, no scent, nothing. Just the pristine, untouched counter gleaming under the noon sun. She blinked once, twice, then she opened the fridge. And that was it. The scream that erupted from her throat didn't sound human. It was sharp enough to cut through the air, loud enough to bounce off every wall, and fierce enough to send two neighbors running across their lawns. Thomas. she shrieked, voice cracking with pure disbelief. "What is this?" Thomas jumped, like he'd been electrocuted, and sprinted toward the kitchen. Malcolm followed slowly, head bowed, like a pastor walking into a confession booth. I remained still, letting the wind brush past my cheek. Carol's voice exploded again. "Why is the fridge full of labels? What does belongs to Clara mean? Where is my lunch? Has she lost her mind?" Neighbors appeared at the screen door, wide-eyed, and unsure whether to enter or call for help. Thomas tried to calm her. "Mom, please." "No," she cut him off, slamming the fridge door shut so hard it rattled. "This is an insult. An absolute insult. I come here every Sunday, and this is what I find: nothing." Her face was flushed, her hands trembling not from hunger, but from the shock of losing the control she'd always believed she had. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, smoothing the folds of my shawl, and walked toward the kitchen with the calmness of someone attending a meeting, not a meltdown. When I reached the doorway, every head turned toward me. Carol looked like she was witnessing the betrayal of a lifetime. Thomas looked like a man drowning in shallow water. Malcolm looked tired, very tired. The neighbors looked like they had front row seats to a soap opera they didn't know they'd be invited to. And I held my tablet in my hands, its screen glowing. "Good afternoon, Carol," I said softly. She pointed at me with shaking fingers. "What is the meaning of this?" I stepped into the kitchen, standing tall, in the space that had once felt like a battlefield, but now felt like neutral ground. "I thought it was time for clarity," I said. "Thomas and I agreed to separate budgets, and since Sunday meals have always been part of my household workload, I've itemized every service related to preparing them." I turned the tablet around so she could see. The title shone bright: Household and Sunday Meal Services, full invoice and rates. Her mouth fell open, not in shock this time, but in offense. "Is this a joke?" "No," I replied gently. "It's a business policy," she gasped. "A policy?" "Yes," I said. "If you'd like lunch prepared today, I'll need Thomas to approve the service fee." Thomas choked. "What, Clara, you can't." "I can," I said. "You set the rules." The room fell silent again. Even the neighbors seemed afraid to breathe. Carol shook her head, unable to accept the world rearranging around her. You cannot charge your own family." I looked her in the eyes, calm, grounded, unshaken. Then perhaps I said softly, "You should have treated me like family." And just like that, the storm truly began. For a moment, no one moved. Not Thomas, not Carol, not even the neighbors, hovering at the door, their breath fogging the glass as they leaned in closer. It was as if time paused in the quiet kitchen of my seaside home. Then Thomas snapped. He lunged toward me, reaching for the tablet, as if grabbing it would somehow erase the invoice glowing on its screen. "Give me that, Clara," he barked. "This is ridiculous." I stepped back, calm and steady. "No, Thomas," I said softly. "It's reality." He froze, hand suspended in the air. Maybe it was the tone firm, but quiet. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't shrinking away, wasn't retreating into apology or silence. I held his gaze, not confrontational, just clear. "You asked for separate budgets," I continued. "I'm simply showing you what my part has always been worth." Carol scoffed loudly. Worth. Her voice cracked like firewood snapping in a fireplace. "You're his wife. Wives don't charge husbands. This. She waved her hand toward the tablet as if it were something filthy. "This is offensive. Absolutely offensive." But her outrage only highlighted what she refused to see. I turned the tablet slightly so that both of them and the entire unintended audience could see the breakdown. Meal planning, $90. Ingredient sourcing, $45. Prep and cooking, $210 service, $60 cleanup, $80. Total Sunday meal value, $485. Carol's mouth fell open. Her indignation shifted into bewilderment, then into something that looked almost like fear. Thomas shook his head, refusing to accept what the numbers represented. "You don't get to put a price on this," he whispered. I looked at him slowly. "I didn't put a price on it. The market did." Silence again. I could feel the tide turning slowly, gradually, like the ocean outside the window, pulling back before a wave crashes. Then Thomas tried to recover his footing. "Clara, this house, this entire life, we built it together," he sputtered. "You didn't pay for all of this." This was the moment. I could feel it rising, the truth I had held for so long. It almost felt like a burden pressing on my ribs. I set the tablet gently on the counter. Then I walked to the drawer by the fridge, the one where I kept important documents, the one nobody but me ever touched. I pulled out a thin, neat folder. Inside were the closing papers from our home purchase, the bank transfers, the receipts, everything. I laid the folder on the island and opened it slowly, methodically. Thomas's eyes widened. He'd seen this folder once 20 years ago, then conveniently forgot. I tapped the first page. 70% of the down payment, I said, calmly came from selling my mother's house. Carol stiffened. "That can't be. Thomas told us." I cut her off gently, but firmly. "Thomas told you what was comfortable, not what was true." Even Malcolm shifted, crossing his arms as he leaned in to see the documents clearly. I turned the page. "This kitchen, the remodel. You remember that, don't you?" I pointed to the receipts for the new counters, the cabinets, the appliances, all paid with the inheritance my mother left me. Thomas swallowed hard. He looked as if he wanted to disappear into the floor. "And every month since I continued, I've covered utilities, groceries, yard materials, home repairs, guest supplies, all from my business income." Carol stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "That's impossible," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "It's simply invisible labor and invisible money, the kind no one notices because they never bothered to ask." The neighbors murmured behind me, soft, low sounds of shock. For the first time ever, Carol didn't know what to say. Her lips trembled, opening and closing without words. Thomas looked lost, utterly, painfully lost, like a man watching the map of his life reveal roads he had ignored for decades. Malcolm cleared his throat. He was a man of numbers, once an accountant, and the math hit him first. "Clara," he said quietly, "you contributed more than the majority share of this home." I nodded, "Yes." "And you've been maintaining it financially too." "Yes." He nodded again, slower, this time processing, recalibrating. Then he turned to his son. "Is all this true?" Thomas covered his face with both hands. I didn't think it mattered," he whispered. I felt something sharp twist inside me. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. "It mattered," I said. "You just didn't want it to." Carol suddenly snapped back to life. "This doesn't change anything," she shouted. "A wife is supposed to—" Malcolm held up a hand, firm, final. "Carol," he said in a tone I had never heard from him stop. She stared at him, stunned. He looked back at the papers, then at me. "You've been carrying this household," he said. "You deserve recognition and respect." Carol gasped. Thomas dropped his hands, pale and shaken. And that was the moment the power in the room shifted. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because the truth finally spoke louder than all of them. And the truth had only just begun to surface. The room remained frozen, as if the air itself refused to move until someone dared to breathe again. Carol stared at Malcolm, horrified that her husband had taken a stand she'd never imagined possible. Thomas stood helpless, his world collapsing one truthful sentence at a time. But the real twist, the one no one expected that day, came from a voice outside the house. A soft, elderly voice. "Clara, Dear, are you all right? Everyone turned. At the door standing between the two neighbors, who had run over during Carol's scream, was Mrs. Eleanor Watkins, a woman in her late 70s, gentle as the tide on a calm morning. She lived 2 houses down and had known Thomas's family for decades. The moment she stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet gravity, the kind that belongs to someone who has lived long enough to recognize the patterns people pretend don't exist. Eleanor looked straight at me with soft, sorrowful eyes. Then she turned those same eyes toward Thomas and Carol. I didn't want to intrude, she said kindly. But when I heard the shouting, I thought someone might be hurt. Carol tried to compose herself. Her face stiffened, chin lifted proudly. This is a private family matter, she snapped. We don't need outsiders meddling. Eleanor didn't flinch. She walked farther into the kitchen, her steps slow, deliberate, steady as a lighthouse beam sweeping across the sea. I raised 3 sons, she said softly. I know exactly what a private family matter looks like. And this is something else. Thomas looked at her as if begging for rescue. He'd always liked her. He'd always seen her as the quiet, grandmotherly type, the kind who baked pies and remembered birthdays. But now Eleanor wasn't here with cookies. She came with truth. She pointed to the open folder on the counter. This is the down payment on the house, isn't it? I nodded gently. Yes, from my mother's home. Eleanor's eyes softened again, but this time with sadness, deep knowing sadness. Thomas, she said slowly, did you tell your mother, or anyone, that Clara didn't contribute financially? Thomas's shoulders sagged. I didn't think it mattered. Eleanor sighed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't harsh. But it carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. Oh, child, she murmured. That always matters. Not the money, the truth. Then she turned to Carol. And you? I've watched you walk through this neighborhood for 30 years. I've watched you criticize every yard, every tree, every curtain, anyone placed wrong. But today is the first time I've seen you face something that isn't yours to control. Carol's jaw dropped. How dare you? But Eleanor raised a hand, soft, wrinkled, but full of authority. I'm speaking. The room fell completely silent. Eleanor stepped closer to Carol, her voice quiet but unshakable. You have treated Clara as hired help for years. Not as a daughter-in-law, not even as a human being. You never asked what she wanted, never thanked her, never cared if she was tired or hurting. You only cared if she made the roast right. Carol swallowed, stunned. No one, not even Malcolm, had ever spoken to her that way. Eleanor didn't stop. And Thomas, she said, turning to him, I watched you grow up. You were a sweet boy, a thoughtful boy. But somewhere along the road, you learned that silence protects you. It doesn't. It only hides the truth until the day it explodes. He looked at the floor. His voice trembled. I didn't mean to hurt her. Intention, Eleanor said gently, doesn't fix impact. Then she looked at me kindly, warmly. You've been invisible far too long, Clara. I felt my throat tighten, not with sadness, but with the softness of being finally, unexpectedly seen. Eleanor turned to Malcolm next. And you're the only one in this room who understood the numbers before the words. Malcolm nodded solemnly. I should have looked closer years ago, he admitted. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. That's the difference between guilt and growth. You're willing to see now. Then came the twist no one was ready for, not even me. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope, old and slightly worn. I wasn't planning to give this today, she said quietly. But perhaps it's time. She walked up to me and pressed the envelope into my hands. It's from your mother, she said. The room spun for a moment. My mother, I whispered. But she passed away 20 years ago. Yes, Eleanor said, smiling softly. She asked me to hold this letter until the day you truly needed it. She said you'd know when that day came. And I think today is that day. Everyone stared, Thomas in confusion, Carol in outrage, Malcolm in surprise. My hands trembled as I looked down at the envelope. My mother's handwriting, her name, a letter meant for this exact moment of my life. Carol hissed under her breath. What is that supposed to be? Eleanor answered without looking at her. A reminder, she said firmly, that Clara never came into this home alone. She came with strength, and with people who loved her. I held the envelope close, and for the first time in that kitchen, I felt not just strong, but supported. The shift wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was deeper, the kind of twist that doesn't end a chapter, but begins the real story. The envelope felt strangely teary in my hands, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant. A memory reaching out from 20 years ago. A voice returning to me when I needed it most. I opened it slowly. The paper was thin, soft, with age, smelling faintly of lavender, the scent my mother always kept in her drawers. Her handwriting curved across the page, exactly the way I remembered, gentle, patient, steady. My Clara, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've reached a moment in life where you must choose yourself. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of truth. My vision blurred for a heartbeat. I closed my eyes, breathing in the words like a balm. I know you give more than you receive. You always have. And one day, that kindness will be mistaken for weakness by the wrong people. When that day comes, listen to me, my girl. You are allowed to say, enough. You are allowed to draw a line. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who forgets your worth. The kitchen had fallen silent. Even the neighbors seemed to forget they were standing there. I wiped my eyes and continued reading. Love is not measured by sacrifice alone. Love must also hold respect. If respect disappears, don't stay and hope it returns. Choose the life that honors you. Choose peace. The letter ended with her familiar signature, a simple heart drawn beside my name. I folded the paper carefully and held it against my chest. When I looked up, Thomas was staring at me, lost, pale, and suddenly very small. His eyes glistened with something that almost looked like regret, or perhaps fear. Clara, he whispered, I didn't know she left something for you. You didn't ask, I said gently. Carol crossed her arms tightly over her chest. This changes nothing, she hissed. That letter doesn't excuse this humiliation. But Malcolm stepped forward, voice low and steady. No, Carol, it changes everything. She spun toward him, shocked. Why are you taking her side? I'm taking the side of the truth, he said firmly. Something you've ignored for years. She gasped, hand flying to her chest as if he'd struck her. But I didn't want revenge. I didn't want victory. I wanted something much simpler and far harder for them to accept. Peace. I placed the letter on the counter beside the folder of financial documents and the still glowing tablet. Then I looked at Thomas. Thomas, I said softly, this isn't about punishing you. This isn't about money. It's about dignity. And we both know the way things have been can't continue. He swallowed hard. I can change, he whispered. I'll set boundaries with my mother. I'll fix this. I shook my head, not in anger, but in a kind of sad compassion. This isn't something you can fix with a promise. It's something you have to rebuild with action. And that starts with accountability. His eyes glistened. What does that mean? I took a deep breath. It means I'm giving you a choice, I said. A toi hao tu tu te. Not meant to hurt you, but to give us a chance at honesty for the first time. Everyone listened. Thomas, I continued. Our marriage can only move forward on one condition. You go to counseling with me. Not family counseling, not marriage counseling, your counseling. You need to understand why you let this happen and why you never defended me. His face tightened with shame, and I added quietly, you will speak the truth to your parents, to your friends, to yourself. You will acknowledge my contributions openly. No more pretending, no more rewriting history. He wiped his eyes, nodding slowly. I can do that. Carol's voice erupted. You can't be serious. Counseling. Admitting fault. Thomas, don't you dare. But for the first time in his life, he didn't look at her. He didn't flinch. He didn't follow her lead. He continued looking at me. What if I agree? He asked quietly. Then I said I'll stay. We'll try. We'll rebuild everything from the truth upward. And if I don't, the room held its breath. I lifted the folder gently. Then we will divide this home fairly, I said. We will separate with dignity and kindness. I won't punish you, Thomas, but I won't stay invisible anymore. His chin trembled. Carol pointed at me, trembling with fury. You're manipulating him. But Eleanor stepped forward again. No, Carol. She's giving him a chance you would never give anyone. Then Malcolm spoke, voice deep and steady. She's being more generous than most. Thomas, take it. Thomas sank onto a stool, hands covering his face. He didn't answer right away. But when he finally looked up, his voice was barely audible. Clara, I choose you. I'll go to counseling. I'll tell the truth. Just, please don't leave. I nodded softly. This is not a punishment, Thomas, I said. It's a promise. If you show me change, I'll show you forgiveness. And that was the moment, the real twist of the entire story. Not the scream, not the invoice, not the financial reveal, but a quiet decision. A line drawn with kindness instead of anger. An invitation for redemption, offered only once. There is a moment in every life when silence finally becomes heavier than truth. When staying small becomes more painful than choosing yourself. When the walls you built to keep peace begin to feel like the very walls that keep you trapped. For me, that moment happened in a quiet kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, with a letter from my mother resting on the counter and a lifetime of invisible work finally laid out in the open. But healing never arrives with a scream. It comes softly, gently, the way dawn reaches a dark room, not by force, but by presence. People often think strength is loud, that it's anger or confrontation or sharp words said at the perfect time. But sometimes strength is quieter. It's the calm voice that says, I deserve better. It's the stillness that refuses to shrink anymore. It's the gentle ultimatum offered not to punish someone, but to give them a chance to rise. Thomas began counseling the very next week, not because I demanded it, but because he finally understood what I had carried alone. And I learned something too. Something my mother knew long before I did. Your worth is not proven by how much you endure. It's reflected in how bravely you choose the life that honors you. Maybe your story looks different from mine. Maybe the kitchen is different. The voices are different. The wounds are different. But if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued in your own family, I want you to know this. You are not alone. Your effort counts, even when no one acknowledges it. Your heart matters, even when others forget its weight. And your peace. Your peace is worth fighting for. Kindly, firmly, unapologetically. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment when you finally said enough? Not with anger, but with clarity. Share your story in the comments. Your words might be the lantern someone else needs in their darkest hallway. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, remember to subscribe to the channel. There are more stories here. Stories of healing, of rediscovering self-worth, of finding peace after storms that lasted far too long. We may be broken at times, but we are never broken alone.